And I especially can't call on the supers. So I gotta have my own wiles.
Secret Invasion was a prolific comic book run that left readers shocked issue after issue. Earth's mightiest heroes didn't know who they could turn to, even among themselves, to ward off the Skrull invasion. And everywhere they turned, there was a new betrayal. The Avengers weren't the only major players either. The Fantastic Four, members of the X-Men, who, to be fair, were Avengers at the time, the Defenders, as well as the likes of S.W.O.R.D., S.H.I.E.L.D., the Young Avengers, Norman Osborn, and a whole bunch more all played major roles in the arc. And, as you may have noticed, many of those major players haven't been introduced into the MCU canon yet. And others probably aren't going to be making their debut here. But all of that may work out just fine. As it happens, the intent of Secret Invasion was never to really adapt that run despite the decision to use the name. IGN sat down with some of the cast and crew to discuss this new version of the story, and how it all works, particularly with the Skrulls starting off as refugees rather than alien invaders.
Well, when I first took this job, the first thing that Marvel said to me is, don't read the comics. They have nothing to do with this series. And this series was more born out of the electric relationship that was created between Nick Fury and Talos, or Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn in Captain Marvel.
That's not a cat. That's a flirkin.
A flirkin!
Marvel's guidance to the director was that the studio wanted to do a show that played off the dynamic between the two actors, but also used that tale as a springboard to a story with more serious themes surrounding terrorism.
And they just wanted to cue off of that, and I think make a story that talked more about the nuances of where terrorists come from or where psychopaths come from, and less about just bad guy, good guy. Because it's a more nuanced story of Nick Fury, as we get to go not just see his badass self, but we see him in his personal life and in his inner life even. And I think all of those things are more complex from good guy, bad guy, the binary world of good guy, bad guy. And I think comic books are great, and the comic books inspired a lot of, that is in here, but we weren't anchored to them.
For Kingsley Ben-Adir, the actor behind Gravik, the series' lead villain, there was something very specific to his approach when it came down to the complicated issue of presenting a refugee as the big bad.
No sentimentality, that he loves no one, that we're dealing with a guy who this is beyond us and them, my people, your people. I was like, we do not have the time to explore that level of complexity in this show. This guy has to be a sociopath of some sort. There are a bunch of those Skrulls who are good people, but this idea of to coexist or to not coexist, I think here's a guy who's using that to exploit his people, really for a payback that is deeply, deeply personal. This is psychologically speaking, I was like, he has to be someone who, when we meet him at the start of this film, cares for nothing or anyone. Whether he lives or dies today is of no importance to him. It's just another day. So the only way he can feel something is by inflicting pain on people. That's the only justification I could come to when researching these guys, all of those cult leaders from over the last 20, 30 years in those documentaries, and you watch them and the way they behave.
Viewers will learn more of Gravik's tragic past as Secret Invasion gets deeper into the story. But the idea that Ben-Adir outlines here, the fact that Gravik can't really feel anything unless he's inflicting pain, helps expand on what otherwise would have been a rote trope. He's not the way he is because of his past. He's the way he is because he's a sociopath. Ensuring that Gravik had a complete lack of sentimentality, whether it be to the Skrulls loyal to his cause or to the humans he seeks to overthrow, was something that Ben-Adir worked on with a creative team as well.
The us and them thing for me was this is a tool for him. This is something that he can use to exploit vulnerable people. The most important thing to me. And that's what I talked to with Ali, the director, and the producers at Marvel, because it's very easy for these characters to go into sentimental territory. And they love and they care and they love and they care, but it reduces the behavior, and it reduces what it reduces that type of behavior in a way that I don't think is appropriate. It's one thing to be in a war with people who are engaged in a war, but to start blowing up people who aren't involved, for me, is a type of gangsterism.
There's an added level of complication to Gravik well beyond, or perhaps married to, the complications of having a refugee as a villain. It's one that he shares with X-Men's Magneto and Black Panther's Killmonger in that the root of their wrath is justified. Their actions most certainly leave something to be desired, but when you look at where they came from or what they were promised, it's easy to see how they ended up mad at the world. For Ben-Adir, what helped him crack that complicated balance, outside of the lack of sentimentality as a whole, was trust.
Well, I think thematically, the idea of who can you trust was like what it was trying to build upon. And so I guess as an actor, depending on what character you're playing, that's probably the first question you should ask, like who does he trust? And I think the most interesting line for me was, what if he trusts no one, you know? Like, if he trusts no one, does this become more interesting and perhaps satisfying, like, or does it become more truthful to like what people who behave like that, like the truth of why people eventually at some point get to a stage where they do feel like blowing up town squares where there's innocent people, like is an appropriate way to behave.
On the flip side of all those moral complications is Ben Mendelsohn's Talos. Forever the believer in humans and longtime friend to Nick Fury, Talos matches Gravik's endless wrath with constant empathy. For most, it'd be impossible to maintain that empathy after decades of being failed. But it's Gravik's invasion that puts Talos to the test.
It's enormously challenged. It's challenged in his ability to be as someone who is an executive person. In other words, can execute something in the real world. And it's challenged within, it's challenged in that. It's challenged because Fury is hanging out up in space. And it's challenged because his daughter sees, I think, the actual clearer, more authentically Skrull position.
You won't have less baggage.
You have a lot less baggage and you can cut through things. I, on the other hand, I know the humans a lot longer.
Yeah.
And have a take on that, which I think, I love this show. I really do. Yeah. I think what Kevin and co have done and is give us something which is a real opportunity for people to dig the MCU in a very different way, and people that may never have dug the MCU, as you said earlier, can come on in and enjoy the sunshine of this very dark Cold War thriller.
There's also the classic dynamic of, your parents are from a different time than you are. Which is so relevant for now, I feel like, at every generation. It's like, oh, they don't understand the younger generation. So there's a bit of that going on as well. Like, I see things differently because I was born at a different time. Yeah. And I don't have the history of what you've lived through. And I just get to come on and think that I know everything, because really I do.
And that is not always the way.
This world is burning, and it was you who lit the match.
Something that also feels critical to highlight is that Gravik isn't the only one who's furious. He's just the only one making it everybody else's problem. Talos may be loyal to Nick Fury, but that doesn't erase the fact that his people were promised a home in exchange for their services to Fury. The Skrulls have been acting as his spies for decades, and in return they were abandoned. Gaia herself is in a unique position. While she most certainly inherited her father's care for their people, she has a different mentality when it comes to their future. She's been displaced her whole life, and by proxy, lied to her whole life by Fury and his empty promises. We first meet the Skrulls decades ago in Captain Marvel, and their situation has barely changed. This fact was key for Emilia Clarke as she tackled the character.
For me, it informed everything. It informed our entire dynamic, our entire relationship that obviously we had, which already pre-existed, and we already had how we were as a father and a daughter. But put that on top of it, and you're looking at two different sides of the same coin, essentially.
And while I would say, yeah, in a way nothing's changed, in a way, like a lot
Everything's changed.
That because of that, nothing changed. There's been an incredible change. And it's funny because I hadn't thought of this until just earlier today, but when we were doing the rehearsals, We were talking about very different things, and we had a sort of a frisson. We would sort of argue points and stuff like that. And then what happened is I would take away what Emilia said and go, no, she's right. She's right. I see why that thing, And so even when we were cooking this up, we were layering in a bunch of ideas and things about that. Remember that?
Yeah, we had a brilliant time when we were doing rehearsals, and Mendo you would like riff on stuff, and I would find myself finding the counterbalanced argument, and together, I mean, this is stuff that didn't make it into the show, but we would like. We'd really get underneath what it was, so that then when we had the actual scripted dialogue, it was embedded with all of this stuff that we'd already said to each other.
Yeah, because
which is really amazing.
Yeah, because
and what a luxury to have when you're filming.
Exactly, but we really were coming at it from different places and looking at it, and it had different conclusions.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the bedrock.
Yeah, throw into that like the friction of the father-daughter dynamic, which is just purely domestic and kind of nuanced in its own right, and then you have this moral quandary on top of it. It makes for a really textured, nuanced relationship.
The friction of the father-daughter dynamic is far from the only friendly conflict in the series. Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury and Olivia Colman's Sonya Falsworth are quite the pair, and despite their very super powerless human status, both characters think they are the only one who can stop this alien invasion. Despite their respective certainty and lone wolf mentalities, this is a very different Nick Fury than the one that we remember. The blip took its toll, and while he's as certain as ever that he's the sole solution, the Fury that we meet in Secret Invasion is one forced to grapple with his mortality and the limitations that come with it.
I don't know that until I get in it and realize that, okay, I can't call on the people that I normally call on to help me solve problems. And that includes the Skrulls that I've been using as, my kind of network of people. And I especially can't call on the supers. So I gotta have my own wiles or whatever that, help me, which, she informs me you're not using them very well anymore. So she's way stronger and smarter in that essence.
Well, that's
you are. No, in that, right now,
But yes, I think Sonya has been running her thing, and eyes on everything. Quite happy you arrived back. Slightly irritating because
I mean, the mere fact that you even know I'm back, that you could send some guys out to look for me, says tons. I mean, he got back the same night he got back. You kidnapped him. Come on.
But she doesn't. Obviously, she finds out much more from you, and then they try and. Because you've only seen
find
it to
out
number
much
2.
more from you inform me that I don't need to be there.
Yeah,
that's what you're telling me. You're literally telling me go back.
As a friend,
go back wherever you've been.
That wherever you've been, we'll probably get a lot more context as the series progresses. For now, we know he was up on a space station and that the blip affected him a lot more than he's letting on. Either way, seems like we'll have plenty of twists, turns, and big questions as the series unfolds, even without the Avengers and the other major players who were involved in the comics. For more Secret Invasion, check out our review of the first 2 episodes. And for everything else, stick with IGN.